So before we begin, I wanted to address a couple things. First off, apologies that it's taken as long as it has to get a new video out. I admittedly went through a bit of a creative rut after the Games of 2022 video, and no idea was really sticking up until now. So I ended up taking an unofficial break of sorts. Hopefully the gap between this video and my next one won't be quite as big, but I won't make any promises. Though secondly, continuing off what I noted at the end of my Games of 2022 video, this here is the 50th episode of my main video series that I started back when I rebranded in 2017. It's kinda wild that this rebranding of mine has gotten this far, and I gotta say, I am a lot happier with where my channel's at nowadays, with the kind of videos I make, and especially the kind of people it brings around. Seriously, thank you all for being so supportive and wonderful over these past few years. It's especially made doing these videos worth it. With that said, with this being the 50th episode, I did want to do something special for the occasion, and I could have done something more milestone-y for the topic, but instead, I felt it'd be fun to tackle a topic I've thought about doing for quite some time. You know I love me some obscure video games, and I've covered many a licensed game on here before, so what do you say we unite the topics together into one? And believe me when I say, there is no shortage of material for this video. Licensed games used to have an iron grip on the gaming industry, and especially in the 2000s, just about any piece of licensed material could get a tie-in game. A Lemmings-style GBA game based on a nature documentary? Sure, why not? A pocket bike racing game based on a fast food brand? Sure, why not? And yeah, some licensed games have gone above and beyond and left a notable mark on the gaming landscape, but with the abundance of licensed games, many have fallen out of the limelight, if they were even there to begin with. And those are the kind of licensed games that I want to look at today. There's plenty of material all throughout the decades, but I'm primarily going to be focusing on the 2000s and onwards, as those are the gaming eras that I'm more familiar with licensed game-wise. With that said, let's get this ball rolling. To start things off, we're jumping into the world of Disney tie-in games. Though instead of looking at one based on a specific IP of theirs, why not cover multiple at once? What we have here is Disney's Think Fast, a Disney-themed trivia game that came out on the Wii and PS2 back in 2008. This is one I actually had back in the day, and I remember playing this a fair bit with my sisters. We all grew up off the Disney animated film lineup, so we were basically the main target audience for this game. Question is, does it hold up? It's half and half. The game takes the structure of a TV game show, with the genie from Aladdin serving as the show host. This was the first time that Genie's current voice actor, Jim Meskimen, played the character. And while he's certainly trying, this isn't really Genie's A material, to say the least. Then again, one of my sisters and I still quote his "game is afoot" bit every now and then, so maybe it did click with younger us.
So, detective, the game is afoot. Or a hand, or something like that.
Oddly enough, though, he does have a handful of genuinely funny jokes in the credits.
Unbelievable show, team. I don't think a single member of the audience even noticed the studio was on fire the whole time. Oh, my feet are killing me. What? Why don't I just use magic and float around? Wise guy. The credits are still rolling? You're sure everyone worked on the show? Because I'll know if you put your nephew's name back in there.
Also, Genie casually threatens murder by drowning at one point.
Genie, all the water! How are we going to breathe?
Worry not, with my phenomenal cosmic powers! I'll make sure you breathe normally for the duration of the show, as long as you make sure you laugh at my jokes, okay?
As for the rest of the game's cast, you play as one of the many characters of the Mickey Mouse universe. You've got your standard choices like Mickey, Minnie, Donald, Goofy, Pete, etc., but you've also got some more out-there characters they don't use nearly as often, like Clarabelle Cow, Magica Dispel from DuckTales, Horace Horsecollar? That's a character they almost never use anymore. But yeah, the game has you going through multiple rounds of multiple choice trivia, often with some kind of gimmick to the round. Watching a movie clip from one of Disney's movies and then answering a bunch of questions relating to it, guessing a character based on clues in a gradually forming character sketch, movie-specific questions relating to whatever themed area you've chosen, stuff like that. It's a pretty standard trivia game, but I will give credit for just how vast the questions get source material-wise. It doesn't stick to just the most well-known stuff. They're gonna ask you questions about basically every one of the main animated lineup. Like, there are multiple questions relating to both Atlantis and Treasure Planet in this game. You'll love to see it. That said, the game is clearly made for children, and as such, a lot of the questions are pretty simple ones. So barring a handful of trickier questions that popped up, I did admittedly start to get kinda bored partway through. Even with the minigame in the middle to try and spice things up, it's the same spot the difference minigame every time. So even that doesn't help much in keeping things from feeling repetitive. I do remember this being more fun in multiplayer, but I didn't do any multiplayer for this playthrough, so rip me. The weirdest part of this game to me though is the second round, 50-50. It's multiple choice questions with only two options, simple enough premise, questions. But literally none of the questions have anything to do with Disney. Instead, it asks stuff like, which is hotter, the ocean or lava? Also, I don't know who is in charge of choosing the character stills for the answers, but some of these stills aren't very flattering. Like, very not flattering. But yeah, Disney's Think Fast is okay. There's some fun to be had in the right circumstances, but as a solo experience, I personally wouldn't recommend it, especially for older players. Though if you want to test your noggin in a way that's not related to Disney trivia, how's about some I Spy? Don't know who here remembers these, but back in the 90s and 2000s, there was this wide craze of puzzle books under the name of, well, I Spy. The formula of these books was simple. Every set of pages would have a picture of objects all cluttered together, with a riddle about what you had to find within the picture. It was a simple format, but hey, given just how many I Spy books ended up being made, it clearly found itself a lot of success. And eventually, this success carried over into video games, because my goodness, there's apparently a lot of I Spy tie-in games. I myself grew up with one on Game Boy Advance, known as I Spy Challenger, which is the one I'll be looking at now. Yes, this is really where we're taking this video. Though honestly, despite it sounding like this could easily be the cheapest of cheap cash-ins, I Spy Challenger has a bit more meat on its bones. It does have the standard I Spy formula accounted for, with each collage picture having 3 separate sets of riddles to clear, so it gets a lot out of each picture. But interestingly, that's just 1 out of 4 different game modes. In fact, it's actually the 3rd game mode option, weirdly enough. The first game mode, Match Attack, is a matching object puzzle game, where you shoot items at whatever they match with on the other side of the screen and clear the board before time runs out. The first level keeps it simple. Plane goes with plane, watermelon goes with watermelon, but what matches with what in later levels isn't that straightforward. For example, level 2, you shoot shoes at socks and baseball bats at baseballs, while level 3, the connection is words that rhyme. You shoot cars at stars and bees at keys. And it continues on with those kind of patterns. So in other words, this matching object puzzle game is also partially a brain teaser. And even in the matching object part, there's an element of strategy from having multiple of the corresponding item in a row when you clear them, earning you extra points and a free match. I'm talking way more in depth about this one game mode in an I Spy GBA game than I thought I would, but it's actually pretty fun. The second game mode, Grid Grab, gives you a square of objects, with a line of objects in a specific order up at the top. Your goal is to highlight that line of objects in the square, which can include diagonally. Clear all the lines you're given before the time runs out, and you win. And it's simple enough when it's a 3x3 square, but later levels have you finding lines of 3 in 4x4 squares, so it doesn't take long for this mode to become a surprisingly challenging challenge. Also, actually, the game's got some surprisingly good music all around, but Grid Grab's music especially kinda slaps? And our final mode is Hoop Drop, where you place corresponding objects in hoops, with some hoops having a Venn diagram-esque overlap for objects that have connections to both categories. For example, in one level, one of the hoops contains food items, while one contains circular objects. In the overlap, you place circular food like oranges and cookies. This one's actually pretty fun too, especially since you're able to control the speed of the screen scroll, allowing you to rapid drop items once you've gotten good enough at it. Why yes, I am talking about getting skillful at I Spy minigames. What of it? But yeah, I Spy Challenger holds up pretty well, all things considered, which is really weird to say out loud. Not a game I necessarily say you need to go out of your way to find, but like, if you can find it at a decent price and enjoy doing these simple kind of brain teasers, it's not a bad outlet to scratch that itch. I know that may sound a bit ridiculous, but I'm just speaking the truth. I had a pretty fun time with this. With that said, I feel it's time to dive into a specific subset of licensed games now, licensed 3D platformers. It was incredibly common to see 3D platformer tie-in games in the 2000s, especially for stuff like animated movies and shows. In fact, it was such a widespread trend at the time that even otherwise dormant IPs were getting these kind of tie-in games. Case in point, Animaniacs The Great Edgar Hunt, a 3D platformer released on GameCube in 2005 with Europe-exclusive ports to PS2 and Xbox. This was the first Animaniacs-related project released after the series wrapped up in 1999, and after it and another tie-in game on DS, the IP wouldn't be officially used again until the series revival a couple years ago. This trend was certainly something, that's for sure. I played this game a couple times at my uncle's place when I was younger. Said uncle was also who first introduced me to Animaniacs as a whole, and I remember it being alright. But this is also my first time playing it since those days, so time to see if that opinion holds up. The game's premise centers around the upcoming Edgar ceremony, a clear spoof of the Oscars. But on the night prior to the event, all the Edgar trophies are stolen by CeCe DeVille, a bitter film director who uses the stolen Edgars as ransom to get a 10-film contract deal with unlimited budgets from Warner Brothers. Though little does DeVille know that all of his film projects will end up being cancelled during post-production. Sorry, the studio being Warner Brothers made it hard to resist making that joke. In any case, thanks to a goof up from his henchman, DeVille's blimp crashes into the studio water tower, scattering the stolen Edgars across the studio lot and allowing Yakko, Wacko, and Dot to get out of the water tower. From there, it's up to the Warner siblings to journey across the studio's various themed sound stages, collect the missing Edgars, and finally defeat DeVille before the Edgar ceremony. It's a simple enough premise that definitely fits the Animaniacs world quite well, and the writing overall does go for a similar sense of humor that the original show did. It captures that Animaniacs charm pretty well for the most part, helped by the fact that the show's original voice cast reprised their roles here, and it does have a fair few genuinely funny jokes throughout.
You write scripts on people's heads?
That must be uncomfortable for them.
What kind of pen do you use?
No, I don't write scripts on people's heads. Head scriptwriter means I'm in charge of all the other scriptwriters, that's all.
Oh, so they write on people's heads.
You do know how to climb, don't you?
Over the backs of all my friends to get to the top? Sure.
Okay, Sonny. Then go climb the face of that rock there.
Okay, I think this is where they bring in my stunt double, right?
I have just finished the construction of my new invention, the time bomb. Unlike ordinary bombs, this device does not contain any explosives. That would be dangerous.
You've probably got a golden Edgar locked in there as well, haven't you? Not that this game is getting predictable or anything.
To be sure I have. You're the smart one, aren't you?
And I'm the cute one.
And I'm the psychologically unhinged one. Ah, that'll be the instruction manual for the chariot. What does it say? Press the jump button to accelerate. Use the movement stick to steer. Press the action button for a speed boost. Well, like most things you say, that makes absolutely no sense to me. Read it again.
As for the gameplay, Great Edgar Hunt goes the collectathon route, with the Edgar trophies being your Power Star equivalent. You'll get them from stuff like completing quests you're given by NPCs in each soundstage, defeating bosses, finding Chicken Boo, who's disguised as an enemy in each level and can be tracked with a magnifying glass you get later in the game,
That's not a psychotic chainsaw-wielding maniac. It's a chicken!
and collecting enough of each soundstage is equivalent to coins, though every level has 2 Edgars dedicated to this task, one to collecting 125 of them, and then another to collecting all 300. And as far as I'm aware, this game doesn't have a means to track the ones that are remaining, so that latter task is a pain in the neck to say the least. You start off the game with just Yakko, but you'll find and rescue Dot and Wacko in the first 2 levels, allowing you to play as them as well. For the most part, the trio do play the same, but each of them have their own exclusive ability that you unlock partway through the game. Yakko gets bombs, Dot gets the ability to limbo underneath small crevices, and Wacko gets a shovel for digging up designated spots. Because of these abilities, you'll find yourself switching between the Warner siblings a fair amount throughout the game, and this is one of those multi-character platformers where character switching is done at a specific spot, rather than being able to do so whenever. Fortunately, it's actually one of the better executed takes of this trope. Character switching doors are very common, with one more often than not being present in areas where you need a specific character, so tedious backtracking is far less frequent than in other games that utilize this. It's not gone altogether, granted, and the times you do have to backtrack are irritating, but again, they're not nearly as common. I still would have preferred on-the-spot character switching, but all things considered, it's not badly handled here. It's also helped by, surprise, the presence of fast travel. Key areas in a level will often have a warp door, allowing you to quickly make your way through these otherwise pretty big levels. I think this was a good call. Especially so since, with the unlockable character abilities and additional abilities shared across all 3 siblings, you're going to find yourself coming back to previous levels a fair amount, and many of them are not small levels. The levels themselves follow pretty familiar platformer archetypes, but they've got enough charm to them that they generally feel fun to explore and platform and complete tasks in. Now granted, this game does have some of that jank you'd probably expect from a smaller budget licensed platformer of this era. Wonky hitboxes, awkward swimming controls, uncooperative AI, and the occasional soft locking glitch, such as swimming out of bounds with no way to get back in. But all in all, Great Edgar Hunt actually holds up relatively well. Sure, it doesn't do anything super stand out from other platformers, but if you're wanting to play some more 3D platformers from this era, especially if you're an Animaniacs fan, this one's not a bad option. I even went out of my way to 100% this game, a process I mostly enjoyed. Like I said, those 300 collectible missions were a pain in the neck. So since we're already in very familiar genre territory for this channel, how's about we migrate to the other genre this channel is known for our next game? That's right, it's kart racer time! The kart racer was another pretty popular genre for licensed games, especially for stuff like animated shows and whatnot. And we have seen a bit of a resurgence of licensed kart racers lately, with the likes of stuff like Garfield Kart, Paw Patrol Grand Prix, Smurfs Kart, and Race with Ryan, the last of which I previously covered in Obscure Kart Racers 2, and it surprisingly wasn't that bad. But what I've got next is a special case. It's not based on a comic character, or an animated property, or even on a YouTube channel. No. This one's based on emojis. I wish I were making this up, but yes, there is a kart racer based on emojis. And this isn't an older recent game either. This came out on Switch a month ago. But don't worry, non-Switch players, you're not excluded. It's on PS4, PS5, Xbox One, and the Xbox Series consoles. No PC port though. Sorry PC players, you'll have to miss out on this. And before anyone asks why I willingly bought this, I had extra eShop credit on hand while I was deciding on games for this video, and I felt I needed at least one especially cursed game. And believe me, Emoji Kart Racer definitely fits that role. So let's not waste any time, let's select our emoji, our hat, our car, and our car color, and get into this. And you know what? By default, we're given a sunglasses emoji and a cowboy hat, so I guess it's time for Rad Jebediah to make his grand return. The funny I referenced the original Obscure Kart Racers video there, because playing this game reminded me of another game from that video. M&M's Kart Racing. The steering in Emoji Kart Racer often feels just as sensitive and not sensitive at the same time as it did in M&M's Kart Racing. But, and I can't believe I'm saying this, M&M's Kart Racing at least had the excuse of being a motion-controlled game. You hear that, Emoji Kart Racer? You're making me give credit to M&M's Kart Racing. But yeah, the handling of this game is really bad, even when trying to use the handbrake. And the only other thing of note with the controls is that the game has a dedicated respawn button, which you'll absolutely need in this because this game's got some really janky physics at points. Like, hilariously janky. And speaking of hilariously janky, the AI. Seriously, the AI often struggle trying to get through this game itself. But to clarify, I wouldn't say it's hilarious enough to warrant trying this game for yourself, because when the physics in the AI aren't being laughably broken, you're left with a super dull kart racer, with some generally lifeless gameplay and really forgettable track design. No son, we have Rainbow Road at home. Rainbow Road at home. And some of these tracks get needlessly long too. One of them legit took a total of 8 minutes to complete. The power-ups don't fare much better, mostly just checking off the kart racer power-up boxes and calling it a day. The one power-up stands up amongst the rest and not in a good way. After all, what emoji-related project would be complete without the poop emoji? It's a necessity. Haven't mentioned yet that this game costs 33 Canadian dollars on the eShop and 40 Canadian on the PlayStation Store. And also, going back to that M&M's Kart Racing comparison, it may not have the legendary approaching sound barrier, but that's okay. This game's got its own standout audio-based features. The game's already ridiculously loud as is by default compared to the Switch menu, but whenever you finish a race, your ears get attacked by stuff like this. Haven't felt this deaf from playing a game since Shrek Treasure Hunt. Sure, the game's got a decent number of tracks for a shovelware kart racer, and once you complete all the cups, you've got a fair number of options to pick from for your racer. But ultimately, Emoji Kart Racer ain't worth it. Shocker, I know. It hasn't quite dethroned Billy the Wizard as the worst racing game I've ever played, but it's definitely a contender for worst kart racer I've ever played. And because I never bothered seeing the Emoji Movie, I can also say this is the worst emoji-centric property I've experienced. I know, what a great achievement. Actually, you know what? I think I'm gonna need a palate cleanser. Where's that bit where I mentioned a bunch of recent licensed kart racers? And we have seen a bit of a resurgence of licensed kart racers lately, with the likes of stuff like Garfield Kart, Paw Patrol Grand Prix, Smurfs Kart. There, we'll go with that one. So here we have, well, Smurfs Kart, a Switch-exclusive kart racer that came out in November of last year. Can't say I entirely know why we got a Smurfs tie-in game now of all times, but I also don't keep up with Smurfs-related media, so maybe there's some new show or something that I'm completely unaware of. Either way, I picked this game up on a whim at a game store a couple months ago out of morbid curiosity. And having not heard a single thing about it since its initial trailer dropped on Nintendo's YouTube channel, I have zero idea how good or bad it's gonna be. But after Emoji Kart Racer, even just mediocre will feel like a breath of fresh air. Well, that was a pleasant surprise. So being up front, Smurfs Kart doesn't do anything super standout for the genre. In fact, in several areas, it almost feels like the developers hyper-analyzed Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and then recreate it with Smurfs assets and a smaller budget. Seriously, it's got the exact same drifting system, the exact same trick system, the ability to hold 2 items at once. No anti-gravity though, that's beyond Smurfs technology, I guess. It does do a couple things its own way, such as a different style of starting line boost that I do like, and I just remembered that it's one that My Sims Racing uses as well. And each character's got a unique power-up of their own, a la Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, but it's very clear which kart racer Smurfs Kart was most inspired by. Having said all that, it does do what it does pretty well for the most part. The driving controls are solid, there's a good sense of speed and flow even on the slower speed level, and while its track lineup is pretty small and track theming variety is minimal, the track design itself is overall pretty solid too. Though some of the later later tracks I didn't feel were quite as strong. The only major issue I have with the game is the item RNG, which often gets painfully brutal. Like, you know that one Mario Kart Wii video where the player drops from 1st to 12th in a matter of seconds almost entirely out of their own control? That basically happened to me in Smurf's Kart. I will also say that I think the game's asking price is a bit much. It's $50 here in Canada, and not only does it not have a lot of tracks, Emoji Kart Racer actually had more than it, but it only sticks with the bare minimum game mode-wise, so you can experience everything the game has to offer in only a couple hours. For that amount, I'd sooner recommend something like CTR Nitro Fueled or Team Sonic Racing. Heck, the latter's actually $10 cheaper on Switch here in Canada. But if you are wanting another kart racer on your Switch and are willing to pay that amount, Smurf's Kart is a pretty alright option. Again, nothing groundbreaking, but it's a generally fun time all in all. And that now brings us to our last game of the video. And if you thought a kart racer themed around emojis was weird, you ain't seen nothing yet, because I've saved the strangest of the bunch for last. To finish this video up, we're going to be taking a look at Darkened Sky, a fantasy action-adventure game that came out on PC and GameCube back in 2002. I suspect some of you already know where this is going, but for those who don't, I'll give you the rundown. This game is not based on a movie, or a show, or a comic book, or any kind of book for that matter. In fact, its world and story are wholly original works, focusing on a shepherd girl named Sky as she becomes the target of the tyrannical Lord Nekroth after coming across a lost magic artifact, one of many that Nekroth had gathered up to try and keep magic out of the hands of the people so they couldn't rise against him. So it seems like pretty straightforward fantasy adventure stuff, but that then begs the question, what makes this a licensed game? Well, I haven't said what the magic artifact is yet, and I think I'll let the game explain it for me.
That, my strange young sapling, is a Skittles!
Yes, you heard that right. This is a tie-in game for Skittles candy. Skittles are the source of magic in Darkened Sky's world, and the game's lore talks a ton about rainbows being these mystical occurrences that Nekroth's prevented so Skittles don't rain down and provide magic for the people. Seriously, I'm not making any of this up.
Rainbows were real. And when they appeared, so did the Skittles, raining forth like colored hail. The people knew magic then, and 'twas Skittles what fueled that magic. But then Nekroth did the unthinkable. He forged the dark prism and channeled the rainbow to his own foul realm, so that all the Skittles would be his. He rounded up every last remaining Skittles from the people and outlawed magic forever.
And yes, throughout the game, you collect different colored Skittles, and you use them to form magic spells in gameplay. This is a real video game. And the weirdest thing is that, beyond the use of Skittles and the whole rainbow element, it's otherwise a pretty standard fantasy game. One that focuses a lot more on its comedy in its writing, granted, though admittedly from what I played of it, pretty much all the attempts at comedy kinda fell flat.
What do you call that?
I'm going with red-breasted northern butt smiler. Of course, that's just me.
Yeah. Think I'll wander into that pitch-black cave alone? I want to show up in the credits as third dead teenager. Oh no, we'll never figure out what it says. It's written in backwards writing.
No, shh, don't tell me. Your name, I know it. Shy. Spy. Oh, Sty?
Psychic hotline auditions were last week. Try Sky. A Skittles. Mysteriously unaffected by centuries of digestive activity. You see, marketing didn't want us to show us Skittles all narfed up from stomach juices, so they decided... I'll shut up now.
That said, there was one joke during my play session that I actually found pretty funny.
Go, now. The currents of destiny are brewing storm clouds of darkest portent.
Translation?
Move it or you're fried.
As for the gameplay itself, Darkened Sky is, like I said, a fantasy adventure game, having you explore and platform your way through various environments, interacting with the occasional NPC to get items and quests from, fighting off enemies with melee combat and magic, solving puzzles, so on and so forth. Problem is though, I don't think it does it very well, and a fair amount of that comes down to the controls. Sky's movement, especially in the jumping, feels incredibly stiff and often unresponsive, and her melee attacks often feel like it's a gamble on whether or not it even hits your target, not helped by how many hits enemies often take before they die. It makes playing feel really awkward basically at all times, especially in the second area. You're platforming across rocks over insta-kill water, all the while being swarmed by these giant worm enemies that, far as I'm aware, can only be killed after multiple blasts of magic, which you have to line up and aim. Not the easiest thing to do while being swarmed, while also trying not to fall into the water and die. And this is the kind of game that only gives you checkpoints at the start of an area. So if you die, you're being sent back to the start of the area with all your progress between the start and your death resetting. Now granted, the game does have a manual saving system that, when you load your file, will load you back to the exact point that you saved. Think of it like a save state. So you basically have to keep on top of saving manually constantly so that you don't lose much progress when you inevitably have to load up your file again. I have heard this is a less tedious process in the PC version, as there's dedicated keys for saving and loading, but in the GameCube version, you're forced to pause and make your way to the load save screen every time you want to utilize this, and it's tiresome. Also, this game's got some interesting sound design. Some demon enemies screech like falcons. These dragon-like creatures make leopard noises. And the flies... And the sound balancing is really bad, with many sound effects being way too loud, such as the screech of the worm enemies when you finally do kill them. And also this switch puzzle. Whenever you get the combination wrong, it goes to reset. This happens. Now, admittedly, I didn't get super far in this game. Furthest I've ever gotten is the third area, the obligatory swamp area, which you can get to in a regular playthrough after about an hour of playing. But even just those first two areas feel tedious to get through and really not that fun. And last time I tried to get further on my own time, the swamp area just ended up frustrating me more, so I'm good to stop here. This game I more so included for the novelty of, yes, there is a fantasy adventure tie-in game for Skittles, because, well, that honestly just sounds like a Mad Lib. But it's real. Also not entirely sure why or how, but at one point after reloading my file, Sky's model glitched and locked up, so I was stuck running around like this. This is what tasting the rainbow does to a person. And all this is barely scratching the surface, frankly. There's still hundreds of obscure licensed games out there, maybe even thousands. But I don't want to be covering this topic for the rest of time, so I'll stop here and maybe do a follow-up video in the future. But yeah, licensed games truly are a fascinating part of the gaming landscape. And while they're not entirely non-existent nowadays, whether it be higher budget tie-in games like Spider-Man PS4 or Dragon Ball FighterZ, or lower budget shovelware like, well, Emoji Kart Racer, the iron grip the licensed game had back in the day has definitely loosened. Or at least, in the way it used to be. Now we mostly just get licensed content and other IPs, which I suppose makes sense from a business standpoint, but I'll admit, part of me does kind of miss that era where someone would look at their based on a true story horse movie and think, yeah, this will make for great GBA game material. Though I'll think I'll get off the soapbox before I start going on a back in my day tangent. As I said at the start, thank you all for being so supportive and wonderful over these past few years. Don't know if this series of mine would have gotten to its 50th episode without that support. With that said, this has been BenjaMage, and until next video, which hopefully won't take 3 months this time, have a nice day, everybody.